This is Gemara and Yoma Daf Yomi. The learning for this month of Iyar is sponsored as Chus for Roshema of Rivka Bas Basheva, as well as Chus for Roshema and Avsalis Biba Michal Esther. The learning of the entire Chabur should be a tremendous chus for their refuah shlema. As well, this week has been sponsored for his chus refuah shlema for Sarah Bas Kayla Mirtz Hashem. We should continue hearing good updates, and she should be out of the hospital very soon. One more piece of information is that Baruch Hashem, we just received good news that the daf test that we learned about 9 days ago, we learned this chus refuah shlema for Dvayer Bas Rachel, that the surgery should be successful. We just received news that Baruch Hashem, that surgery was indeed successful. We should continue hearing good news. The chus of the Torah of the entire Chabura should be a tremendous chus for everyone. Of course, the refuah shlema many v'vega chaim misar shalom tzivin reizes or bas knendel it vasim as chayisei yisol mindel the president shavlei shamas damid shafiq shulchan v'adamini tiriv v'shom and tiyadin chan reizes v'chayiv v'snili brachos tav musa tineido b'shen minda sim chotavi v'nevega fesh tzivin v'vega v'vega v'psichol yisor nevel lehuda v'nachabend v'ntayva v'soy shachali Yisrael, and as well as chashidach for atalei bas ita. We pick it up. We're really holding. We went into Daf Yomi. We're just going to get a quick jump start from Yud Zayin and Beis. We'll go a little bit up to the Taner Abanan, about 16 lines from the top, just to explain a little bit more. We ran through it a little bit fast at the end of the previous year. So Taner Abanan, Keitzad Makriv, Chelek Baroish, Aimer Oila Zu Ani Makriv. Again, we're talking about the Kohen Gadol. He's allowed to choose whatever carbon he wants. So if he decides he wants a certain chilek, what does he say? I'm going to bring this ayla mincha zuani makrav. I'm going to bring this mincha. Keitzad noital chilek baroish aimer chata zuani oichel asham zeh ani oichel v'noital chala mishtei chalois arba chamisha mimaysalach ma upon him. And these are the three statements. I like to break it up that way. I think it'll be nice and clear that we're going to discuss for a few moments. First, the Mishnah says, this price, statement number one. Statement number two is a Kohen Gadol takes 4 or 5 lechem upon him. Statement number three is Rabbi Yomer Leilum Chamesh. He always takes 5. Shenemar v'yisal Aaron lebanav mechsel Aaron u'mechsel lebanav. So we have 3 statements. First, it says the Kohen Gadol takes 1 of 2 of the carbonos, of the chalos, of the shtei sirim, of the carbon, of the shavuos, Then the second statement is, it says he gets 4 or 5 of the breads lechem abanim. Then it says, Rebbe says he gets 5. Why 5? Because Aaron ubanav, Aaron gets half, children get half. How is half of 12? 5? We'll see in the Gemara. But the Gemara speaks out, Agufa Kasha, what's going on over here? Number 1 was 1 out of 2 money. That's Rebbe, Damer Bal Geshak. The opinion of Rebbe says he gets half. Always gets half. So statement number 1 is Rebbe. Even Mitziyasa, Arba Chamish, Mimayslachem upon him. Statement number 2 is that he takes 4 or 5. That's the Rabbanon. Tamri Loi Shalkopalga. The Rabbanon hold he doesn't take half. He always gets a little bit less than half. They agree how Rebbe learned the pasuk, but they learned that he should always be a little bit less than half, not exactly half. And then Ima Seifa, statement number 3 is Rebbe Yomer Chamish. So what's going on? Reish of Seifa Rebbe, Mitzas Rabbanon. And that's basically where we left off. Is what's going on. Statement number 1, he takes 1 of 2, Rebbe. Statement number 3, that he takes 5 is, statement number 3 is Rabbi Omer Leilum Chamish. Statement number 2, he takes 4 or 5, sounds like the Rabbanan. So we're going to have 2 terutzim. Amar Abaye, we're going to have Abaye's teretz, we're going to deal with it extensively, then we'll have Rava's teretz. Amar Abaye, Reisha Mitziyas Rabbanan. Really, I'll tell you that the first statement is also the Rabbanan. But Umay the Rabbanan, Bebrus Lavar Char Lemitzah the Kohen Gadol. What was the first statement? That he takes 1 out of 2. Says the Gemara, that's the Rabbanan. Rebbe is the one that normally says you take half. The Rabbanan agree that when there's 2 items, it's not appropriate for a Kohen Gadol to take less than 1. So when it says he takes 1 out of 2, that's also the Rabbanan. What does it mean that they took 4 or 5? What is going on over here in that statement? Says the Gemara. There's 2 shitas that we're coming to account for. L'Rabbanan, according to the Rabbanan, the Amri, Nichlas Noitel Sheish, V'yetzi Noitel Sheish. That at the switching of the guards, each one took 6. Uschar Akafas Atalah Soisuloi. And there's no extra reward for closing the doors, meaning they disagree with the premise that is a little bit given extra for closing the doors. Then Mishtim Esrei Ba'i Miflik, you have to split 12. What's half of 12? 6. Batzerchad, you take a little bit less, mi palga, because you don't ever want to have exactly half according to the Rabbanan. Chami shakel, so you take 5. Again, so how do you get 5? Because you have 12. Do you give the people who close the door extra? No. Half of 12 is 6. A little bit less than 6 is 5. L'Rabbi Yehuda, Damar Nichlas Noitel Sheva. According to Rabbi Yehuda, that says that the one who's coming in takes 7. Shtayim b'schargov, that's losses. 2 is special. They get extra reward for closing the doors. The one that leaves, no, Tel Chamish takes 5. So then what are we doing? What we're doing is me'eser by miflag. We have to split 10 because there's extra 2 going to shut the doors. So we split 10 in half because we have 5. But Chadam less 1 mibal. Gosh, shakal arba, and therefore you have 4. So statement number 2 that said, and that brisa was 4 or 5 is also the Rabbanan. How does it? What's 4 or 5? Depending on if you're going like the Rabbanan or Rav Yehuda. Are we saying that the other group takes an extra 2 for closing the doors? If they do, it's 10 divided by 2 is 5 minus 1 is 4. If not, it's 12 divided by 2 is 6 minus 1 and it's 5. That is a Bayi's terrorist how to learn up the brisa. Rav Amar says the exact opposite. Kula Rebbe, it's all Rebbe. For Sav like Rav Yehuda, and Rebbe holds like Rav Yehuda that holds. Now we always take 2 and we give the reward for closing the doors. Velamai arba. So how do you get 4? We understand Velamai arba. Chamish, says the Gemara. So where does 4 or 5 come in? If he's holding like Rav Yehuda, that means you take the 12, you give 2 away to closing the doors, you have 10, you split it in half, it's 5. And Rebbe's of the opinion that you always get half. Says the Gemara, Velamai arba chamish by Lamishkal. Says the Gemara, like Hasha, Hadika Mishmar HaMis'akev, Adeleka Mishmar Mis'akev. When the Yom Tovim came, there were extra Mishmaris that hung around. Because if Yom Tov ended on a Thursday, started on a Monday, then what would happen is some of the Mishmaris had to stay over Shabbos. If a Mishmar stayed over Shabbos, then everyone would split up those breads. But let's say Yom Tov was during the week, and someone stayed extra for Shabbos. So if they stayed extra for Shabbos as the Schar, I'ika Mishmar Mis'akev, then we give him an extra 2. So we have 12 minus 2 for closing the doors is 10. Minus 2 for the extra group that stayed because of Yantiv is 8. Mishmayna by Lamif, like we said, 8.5. B'shakal arba. And he delek of Mishmar Misakiv. If there's no group that stayed around, so then it's Me'aser by Lamif, like it's 12 minus 2 for the closing the gates is 10 divided by 2. B'shakal chamesh. Ihachi my Rebbe Omer Leilam chamesh. What's the third statement? Statement number 3 of the Bryce is Rebbe says you always take 5. What do you mean? That's not true. It's 4 or 5 depending if there's a group that stays around. And the Gemara concludes that that is a Kasha. I would like to just see one Rashi is, well, we're not going to see this whole lengthy Rashi, just to see a little bit of it. Rashi says, Rashi is about 6 lines into the narrow lines. It falls on Monday. V'yesh mishmar makdim uba me'erev Shabbos. And they come early. U'misakiv at a regularly stay over. It's like, when you have to figure out your flights, flying to Eretz Yisrael, you got to go, okay, we got to go for an extra Shabbos because we're not going to make it there. Shekol mishmar is Boys Beregel. All the Mishmaris would come on Yantif. Yantif Be'erev Shabbos. Yantif finishes on a Friday. Mishmar Holchas the Mekayim on Be'erev Shabbos. V'yesh Mishmar, and sometimes there are those Shems Akiv Sham. On Moisei Shabbos they stayed over, and therefore we learned in Sukkah Shabbos Seicha Regel. When you have a Shabbos inside Yantif, how you call a Mishmar Shabbos Bechilik Lechem upon him. Everyone gets the same thing. V'chein Yantif Asamul Shabbos. Bein Lov now Shein Yechulun Lashav Shabbos the Mekayim. And Bein Melach Rao Shal Karchlein Makdim Lavai Me'erev Shabbos. How you call a Mishmarei Shabbos? B'chalik lachem apanim. Everyone's equal, because if they have to be there, then all the kind of split it up. Shari al karchan shayim sham. Varihi. But however, chal yom echad lahafsik bein tayim oy milefaneo. Keep going, and this is what part they wanted to see. Shekala hamayid b'chamishi b'Shabbos aymeachra sheschlamayid b'sheni b'Shabbos. So they could have went home, they could have came late, and yet lo yayolem lahaktim lavelim ne'ashabbos. They didn't have to come for the extra Shabbos. Ein non shavos. Then they're not equal, meaning not everyone gets el mishmar hamisakiv b'Shabbos. Beinshu mishmar echad, beinshu mishmar is harbe. Then noitel sheichalois. Then they get the extra. So, but just Rashi was just speaking out. This is very important halacha that basically what's happening over here is that if they didn't have to stay over and they stayed extra anyways, we give them the extra 2 lechem upon him as reward for the extra Shabbos that's there. Says the Mishnah, Masru Loi, continuing the process of the preparations for Yom Kippur. Maslis Kenim Ziknei Bezdin, they would give over the elders. Vikarin Levanov, they read in front of him B'Sidra Hayom. Va'imrim line, they would tell him, Ishi Kohen Gadol, my friend, the Kohen Gadol, my brother, my close one. Kara ata bevicha, read something. Shemesh achachta, maybe you forgot the halacha. Or shemesh lo yilamata, maybe you never learned. The Gemara is going to deal with. He didn't learn. He's a Kohen Gadol. We'll get there in a moment. Erev Yom Kippurim shachar zman b'dinos b'shar Mizrach. They would stand him in Shar Mizrach. Uma'avir levanov parim ve'il mukvasim. They bring all the animals in front of him. Kadeshi makir, so you know each animal. V'ragel v'davaita, you know which animal is which. Kol shivas all 7 days he can eat and drink as he wants. Erev Yom Kippurim im chashich, as it gets dark, they didn't let him eat a lot. You know why? Maybe it's a shina, cause you'd go to sleep, and if you sleep, we could potentially become tummy, carry at night, so we don't let him sleep at night. Just one point, first of all, the Mishnah said they allowed him to eat and drink. What does it mean, drink? Machlekes Rishonim, whether that just means any drink, whether it means intoxicating beverages. Problem is, we know Kehanim are never allowed to have intoxicating beverages. Some say what it means over here is, it means at nighttime. He's just in the preparation process. Every night when he finished Avodah, he would be allowed to drink a little bit. The other thing is a beautiful picture over here of showing the Zakanim that would sit around, that they would teach him the Torah. And over here is another beautiful picture. You see the Kohen Gadol standing on top of the stairs over there, and you see them bringing in front of him all the different animals so that he'd be rugel be'avodah. Says the Gemara, I understand he might have forgotten his learning. It happens. Could it be that there's going to be a Kohen Gadol that doesn't know halacha? Ki I gamna. V'atani learned in a brisa. V'akoyin agadol me'achav. The Kohen Gadol has to be greater. What does that mean? Shegadol me'achav is very greater than his brothers. B'koyach and strength, b'noy and beauty, b'chachma and wisdom, b'oisher and wealth. Acher ma'imrim. Minayim shemein le'em ba'ashach v'achanim me'gadol nisai. How do we know if he doesn't have money? The other Kohanim gave him. Tamalemer v'akoyin agadol me'achav. Gadolu mishalachav. They would give him money. So what do we see? He has to be chacham. He has to be wise. So what do you mean he didn't learn the Seder Avodah? Rav Yosef lo kash kam mikdash shlishi kam mikdash sheni, as we've already started seeing. Damar Rav Asi tarkava the dinri alile marsa bas spices the yane malka. They gave a certain amount of money. Alto Ukmel Yeshua ben Gamla Bekani Ravre, in order to put him as a Kohen Gadol. Unfortunately, the second base of Mikdash, they were buying the Kohen Gedolah, and there were times that they didn't even know the basic halachas, so that is why they would teach it to them. Says the Gemara, continuing smack in the middle of the wide lines. Erev Yom Kippurim Shachris Tana, we learned in the Mishnah Afas Seirim. Why did they say the Seirim they also brought in front of him? Says the Gemara, what was the Seir for? The Seir was brought as a carbon chatos for the sins of Klal Yisrael. We don't want the Kohen Gadol to have a chalishas adas. He's going to feel oived. There's so many aveiros, and he's not going to be able to do that avodah properly. He says, Gemara, 1 second. The par also comes for his own personal aveiros. Explains the Gemara, par kiman da law of like what does the par come for? The par comes for himself or for his brothers, the Kehanim. With his brothers who are Kehanim, Ika Inish the Isbei Milsa, if there's someone that had to do some sort of tshuva, made the other he was a Kohen Gadol, he would know what had to be done. So what isn't a problem? He would tell him to do tshuva. But Kuli Yisrael, such an important idea we're seeing here. All of it, Klal Yisrael lo yada, he didn't know the virus they did. And when you don't know something, you don't feel like you could fix it. What we're seeing over here is, when it came to himself with other Kehanim, okay, if they have a virus, they did something wrong, he'll talk to them, they'll fix it up. But all of Klal Yisrael, he would have a Sadas, he would feel bad that he wasn't able to fix it. That's why they didn't bring the Seirim in front of him. If the son of your sister is a soldier, don't let him see you in the shuk. Again, a similar thing that your family, you know their issues, you know their sins, you know their crimes, and he could come and accost you inside the marketplace. Says the Gemara, all 7 days, they were not refraining from eating and drinking, only an Erev Yom Kippur. Tani, we learned in the Brisa of Yehuda ben Nekusa Oimer, they would feed him, they would feed him flour and eggs. Why? In order to flush out his system so that he wouldn't have to use the bathroom during the Avodah. What do you mean? That could certainly bring him to Chimam. We know that the issue is that we don't want him to become aroused and potentially have a discharge of keri, etc. So says the Gemara, eggs and flour are not good for the system. So they will not feed him. What would they not feed him? Loi aleph beis gim yud, which we'll see in the Gemara what that means. Va'amri la loi aleph beis yud. Now the Gemara explains. Loi aleph beis yod, was that referred to? Loi esrog loi beitzim lo yayin yashin. They wouldn't feed him eggs, estrogen or old wine. V'amilan, some say lo aleph beis yod, which is lo esrog lo beitzim lo basar shemen afani meats lo yayin yashin. V'yesherman, some say lo yayin love and even white wine. Why? Yayin lava and maybe suddenly tama. It brings a person to tama. So this is the Gemara's proof that the opposite. Not like Rav Yehuda said, they would keep him away from these foods because we don't want him to have a potential discharge and invalidate him from doing the avodah. Tan Rabbanan says the Gemara zav. There's one halach we need to know for the ensuing Gemara is that a zav, we know, we've spoken about many times. You see discharge one time, it's more of a disease. You become tummy for one day. You see 3 times, become a zav gedayla. What's important to note is that if we know why the person had discharge, then he doesn't become a zav gedayla. He still becomes tummy for one day, but he will not be a zav gedayla. So says the Gemara, if we know that he ate certain foods, lots of them, then he'll never become a Zav Gedela because we're going to assume that that's why he had the discharge. Zav, then we assume it came from the different foods that he ate. We would not feed him. I'm sorry. Lo ches gimel beis yod, lo gimel beis mem. The Gemara explains, lo ches gimel beis yod, which is what? Lo challah, milk, lo gvina, cheese, lo beitza, eggs, lo yayin, and wine. Lo gimel beis mem, igrisin. What is it referred to? Megrisim, which is the juice of pounded beans, shell-pull of beans, ubasar shemen fatty meats, umaryis, and fish fats. Look, not anything that brings the toma. Lasuyemai. It says a whole list and nothing that brings the toma. What's that coming to include? 5 items bring a person to toma. Veiluhein, hashum, garlic. Moving along to yilchasam ebeis. Vashachalayim, and the Hashom Shachalayim, which is crass, v'hachalgois, and purslane, I think is the word that I've written down over here, v'habeitim and eggs, v'hagargir, and a rocket. Different types of items that they wouldn't let him eat. Now, the Gemara, once we're talking about this gargir, we digress a bit into what the gargir is. We'll point out that Taisus Shanim on the side over here discusses what is the reason that the Kohen Gadol we didn't let him eat these foods. And we're just going to leave it at that. The simplest answer is we only don't let the Kohen Gadol eat the strongest of the foods, not all the different potential harmful foods. Says the Gemara, says the pasuk, v'yatza echad al asada, and one of them went out to the field, lelakit orot, to gather these orot. What were these oros? These were these. Says the Gemara, Tanamish made Rameir. What is this orot? Is it gargir? This is the gargir that we just talked about, a certain type of plant. Amar Rav Yechon laminei kushma oros shemeiris es einayim, it makes your eyes light up. Amar Rav Huna, hamoitzi garger em yachal achlai achlai. Says Rav Huna, if you find this garger, if you could eat it, you should eat it. V'im lav ma'avira gabi einav, you should put it on your eyes. Somehow, it's some good eye remedy. Amar Rav Haba begargira mitzar na'a. We're talking about the one that grows on the boundaries of the fields. Those are the ones that have this wonderful, medicinal property to it. Amar Rav Gidel, Amar Rav. Again, now we're a bit on a digression over here. We started off with what the Kohen Gadol can't eat. We went into other foods that potentially could bring a person to different discharges. And now we're continuing on that theme. It says of Gila Marav and Achsenoi, if you're a guest at someone else's house, you're sleeping on his linens, lo yechal beitzim, you shouldn't eat eggs. Because like we just saw before, an egg could cause someone to have a discharge in the middle of the night. And we don't want it. It's inappropriate to have the host know that you had a discharge on his linen. You also should not sleep in his talis, in his garment, for the same reason. Rav kimak l'dereshish. Now we're going to find a bunch of fascinating stories. When Rav came to a place called Tarshish, Machris, he would announce, Man havoy Yoma, who wants to be my wife for the day? He would get married. The Gemara is saying we're so concerned for different thoughts, for different toma, etc. Wherever Rav would go, he would say, let me get married for the day. Rav Nachman, whenever Rav Nachman would reach a place called Shnitziv as well, similarly Machavir. Now it's Ma'avli Yoma. Who wants to marry me for the day? Says the Gemara, 1 second. But Rav Lesbian Yaakov Heimer, how can he do that? You're not allowed to marry a woman in one city and then marry a woman in another city. Why not? Maybe the children are going to marry each other. If he's going to marry a woman in one city and marry a woman in another city, and no one knows, they might have children, and then 10 years later, they're not going to realize that they're related, and their children might get married, and we're going to have, unfortunately, a brother marrying a sister. And the whole world, unfortunately, will be filled with mamzeres. And on this, what does the pasuk say? And the whole world is going to be filled with zima. So how is it possible that these great Tanaim would go to cities and say, who wants to marry me? So Amri, they answered, Rabbanan Kalis, like, these are great people. Everyone knows that. No one's going to forget who their children are. That's number one. But of a complicated suya, but there's halacha that when someone asks a woman for marriage, you're not allowed to just boom, get married right away. You got to wait 7 days. So how's it possible? They walked into the city, who wants to marry me? And they get married. Well, you have to wait 7 days. Says the Gemara, they would send a message ahead. They would send a message ahead and tell them, Rav is coming, Rameir is coming. Who wants to marry them? And they would wait and separate for 7 days, make sure the woman would become tahar, then they would get married. They didn't actually sleep together, they just had yichud. So what does it help? The whole purpose we have over here is we want them not to become tamei. Explains the Gemara, another big aside. It's true they didn't actually sleep together, but it's called pas besali at some level. At some level, it's considered like you have bread in your basket, which means you can have less harurim, less inappropriate thoughts, knowing you have a wife. Even though in these situations they weren't able to actually sleep together, but yichud for them was enough. And that is, we'll leave it at that. Let's just begin the Mishnah. We'll learn the Mishnah. We're going to call it a day. Masru ziknei Bezdin l'ziknei kahuna. The ziknei Bezdin would give over the kohen gadol to the zikri of the kahanim. Ve'elua beis avtinos, and they bring him up to beis avtinos v'shbiu, and they make him make a swear v'niftaru, and then they would leave. V'holchulem, and they would leave. Amr loi isha kohen gadol anu shluchei Bezdin v'ata shlucheinu. We are the messengers of Bezdin. You are our messenger. Ushliach Bezdin mashbi'inais anu, and we swore to Bezdin olecha b'misha shachein shemai b'bayis zeh to God shloteshanu. You should not change anything for that which we're going to tell you. Who would separate and he would cry. Of course, we know they would cry because they had to suspect him. He would cry because he was suspected. If he was a wise kohen gadol, someone a talmid chacham, he would darsh and he would give shir. Vim laughed. The chacham darsh to him. Vim ragol likrais. If he was ready, if he used to read in Torah, vim lav karin lefanav, they would read to him. Uvim lav karin lefanav. B'iyuv azari v'divrei hayam, and different interesting topics. Zachariah ben Kavut alaymer bam maharbe. Crease the front of Daniel. I read in front of Daniel, and tomorrow we'll have some nice pictures of exactly what this is, and we'll pick it up from here tomorrow.